Hello, a very warm hello if you're listening, a member of one of the Red Roof churches. Welcome, and hello as well if you are a member of one of the Eight Saints cluster churches. With everything else that's been going on recently, it's easy to forget that we are in Lent. We are coming towards the latter stages of Lent, and this Sunday we're celebrating Passion Sunday. It's that Sunday in Lent where the tone changes and the suffering of Jesus comes into view. Our Gospel reading is John chapter 11, and if you haven't read it, you might like to pause this now and read that chapter. It's about Lazarus. At the start, Jesus is being very calculated. In the previous few chapters, Jesus has had various run-ins with the Jewish religious authorities. He has nearly been arrested. In fact, on one occasion he's almost been stoned by a mob, but he's escaped, and now he's hiding really with his disciples at the River Jordan, near to where John had done his baptizing. And while he's there, word reaches him that Lazarus, his friend, is gravely ill. Mary and Martha, Lazarus's sisters, are asking for Jesus to come urgently. But Jesus has a very clear plan, and that is to stay put, to do nothing for a few days. He knows that Lazarus will die, but he knows too that that will enable the most dramatic of all Jesus's signs. But after those few days, Jesus does set off at last. Bethany is back in hostile territory. It's just a couple of miles away from Jerusalem. And when he arrives there, Jesus knows that all sorts of people will be watching out for him to catch him up and slip him up. But now Jesus comes back to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and something changes. Up until then, very much the plan has been that Lazarus must be allowed to die, but now Jesus is confronted by the raw grief of these two sisters, especially when he finds Mary weeping. We read this: "When Mary saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled." And then soon after, famously, the shortest verse in the whole Bible, as Jesus too is caught up in that grief, Jesus wept. Today in Cornwall, as elsewhere, more than usual, there is real grief in the air. The grief of those whose relatives have died because of this virus. The grief too of others bereaved but prevented from the normal activities of grief because of the drastic new rules we must all live by. And alongside the grief today, of course, are all sorts of other emotions. Huge anxiety, frustration, uncertainty, exhaustion for some, and real fear. Jesus understands all these emotions. More than that, he shares in them with us today and offers us not so much a way out of them, but his peace to get us through this difficult time. Back at Bethany, we know how the story ends. Jesus calls for the stone to be rolled away, and then in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And Lazarus does come out, still in his grave clothes, to the utter shock and then utter delight of his sisters and his friends. In unmistakable terms, Jesus shows his absolute power over even death itself. Though in a twist of irony, by this miracle, in a way, he sets the seal on his own death. But that too, of course, is part of God's plan. Jesus' suffering and death brings our freedom and life. We can only share in God's life because God in Jesus has been prepared to share in our death. But more of that in the run-up to Holy Week. For now, though, perhaps the place to dwell a while is this, knowing that in all we are going through right now, in our uncertainty, in our frustration, in our fear, and in our grief, Jesus is right with us. May God bless us with his presence and his peace.